Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Warmest welcome to CCG, Center for China and Globalization. We are featuring CCD Ambassadors Roundtable in conversation with Nordic ambassadors, path towards common prosperity, the Nordic model and beyond. Without further ado, let me turn over to the chair of this Ambassadors Roundtable, Dr. Wang Huiyao, CCG President and former Counselor to the China State Council. Dr. Wang, please, the floor is yours.
So, good morning, Your Excellencies and distinguished roundtable guests, and of course, we have so many friends join us, from think tanks, from media, from scholars, universities. So it's really great to welcome you all to the CCG today. So today, actually, we are very fortunate. We have 5 Nordic ambassadors in Beijing. They are representative of their countries in People's Republic of China, come to CCG, and also we have our Chinese representative here as well today to participate in a dialogue in a roundtable called Passes Towards Common Prosperity, the Nordic Models and Beyond. And so it's a CCG Ambassador Roundtable, and also we're having conversations on roundtables with the Nordic ambassadors. First of all, I'd like to also introduce our distinguished ambassadors and the guests, and then we'll start our discussion. My name is Henry Huiyao Wang, and the President Center for China and Globalization, and I would like to start with the feature presentation introduction of our ambassadors. So, Ambassador, Her Excellency Sine Bredset, Ambassador of Norway to China. Actually, Ambassador Sine, we were actually initiated this roundtable quite a few months ago, and she said, maybe we could have a roundtable to discuss the Nordic experiences, and also since China is now pursuing a common prosperity, and this would be a very good occasion to have a roundtable on this issue. So we are very pleased that finally we can make this happen. So thank you, Ambassador Sine, and also we have Her Excellency Ambassador Helena Segerland, and very pleased to have Ambassador Helena. And yesterday I went to the 500 years of Sweden celebration in the compound of Swedish embassy in Beijing. It was almost 1,000 people there. It was really very impressive celebrations. Also, we have His Excellency Thomas Strup Muller, Ambassador of Denmark to China. So we are very pleased to have him, and His Excellency Thorvald Ibsen, Ambassador of Iceland to China. And we have Her Excellency Nalina Kasi Mikola, Ambassador of Finland to China. So we have 5 Nordic countries. You can see 3 of them are represented by ladies. That's really more than equal. And now, of course, not least, but last but not least, our ambassadors, Ambassador Her Excellency Ma Keqin. She's the executive vice chair, China Economic Cooperation. She was ambassador to Finland, to Czechoslovakia, and also to Philippines. So we have 5 ambassadors, and of course we have other delegation members as well. I'm just follow this sequential. So we have Victor Gao. He's the vice president of CCG, and we have Zhao Hongtao, Deputy Director General, Bureau of North American, Oceania, and Nordic Affairs, International Department of CPC Central Committee as well. And also Mr. Zhang Lirong, Secretary General of China Forum at the Center for International Security and Strategy, Tsinghua University. And also Professor Li Xiaoyun, Chair Professor of the China Agricultural University, and honorary dean of the College of International Development and Global Agriculture, CIDGA. So he has a lot of experience of common prosperity as well. We have a Dr. Miao, he's coming soon. And then, of course, we have a Mike Liu, Vice President and Senior Fellow of CCG. And we have a Zicheng Wang, Director of International Communication Research Fellow at CCG. And of course, we have Francisco Sisi, Senior Researcher at Renmin University. So we have also have many observers of us today. So it's really very, very good that we're having a very, highly collective, highly representative group of speakers and discussing today. So first of all, I'd like to just give a bit of my view as opening remark, and then I'll give the floor to ambassadors. Let me start again. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to CCG Ambassador Roundtable, Passes Towards Common Prosperity, the Nordic Model and Beyond. I'm glad we are all gathered here today and to discuss the unique experience of Nordic countries and its extraordinary implications for China and the world, and also China's experience in this regard. So in an area of globalization, countries everywhere facing daunting socioeconomic challenges. Inequality is rising, cohesion is weakening as society undergo identity crisis, as government in search of role models for governance, equality, and social and economic policy. The Nordic model often ranks on the top. Practiced in Nordic countries, including Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland, the Nordic model is characterized by social equality, innovation, green development, and contributes to the country's continued growth and prosperity. As we all know that China just last year, we had the 20th Party Congress, and this year we had two sections, NPC and CPPC sections. China has also proposed a common prosperity objective. So how can we really learn from other countries and also stimulate, of course, China's own development in more inclusive path? So this is really a good discussion topic. So allocating benefits of economic development to all members of society is a distinguished feature of Nordic model. According to the World Bank statistics, the wealth gap in Nordic region has long been at the lowest level in the world. So that's really a great achievement. And almost every citizen in the Northern Europe can enjoy almost free public medical services, basic pension, high standard of living conditions, and free public education. So although the government of the Nordic countries have significant resources allocation power, they do not impart in individual rights. So according to the global corruptibility ranking, Nordic countries have achieved good results in building a clean government for many consecutive years. The social equality of Nordic countries is also reflected in gender equality and also many social aspects. The global gender gap reported released by the World Economic Forum compared the gender gap of more than 100 countries, showing that Nordic countries have always been the world in the pursuit of gender equality. So I think these 5 Nordic countries are really good examples of what has been achieved in the common prosperity, and also this is have a lot of stimulates, I think, for many other countries, I think also including China. And China shares with Nordic countries a drive to combine market economy and government, of course, intervention as the country seeks to transform its economic and address challenges due to unprecedented challenges and also the slowing growth in the years to come. I think the Nordic experience may shed light on possible pathways towards the national goals of common prosperity. China has done remarkably well in the last 4 decades that we have lifted 800 million people out of poverty. And now we're aimed at a new phase of pursuing a path of Chinese modernization in the years to come. And so this new path, which big chunk of that would be the common prosperity. We still have a 250 million to 300 million migrant workers living in the cities. How can we really achieve common prosperity for them is also a big challenge. And also China has gained a lot of experience, and China has been working with all countries, and China is also interested in working with European countries, particularly Nordic countries, for other developing countries too, that to share the common experience together. And so Your Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, and also of our roundtable guests, now more than ever, we need to work hard together to build a society of common prosperity, and for China, but also, many other developing countries too. And also today, and let's continue this very interesting subject that we, have all the 5 representative Nordic countries, also represented from China, that we can talk in a scholar manner, and then really all your participation is highly appreciated. So I will just stop here in my brief opening remark, but I would like to now present the keynote of 6 ambassadors, basically. So I start with Her Excellency Sine Bratset, and I just briefly introduce her. Ambassador Sine Bratset is ambassador of Norway to China and Mongolia, and has previously been ambassador of Norway to Japan. And Ms. Bratset has served in several senior positions with the Norway Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including the director in section for Middle East and North Africa, and special envoy for Syria and Iraq. Mr. Bratset has also been the deputy director of the private office of NATO Secretary General, and she holds a Master of Science degree in Business Administration from Norway School of Economics, with additional study in international business and marketing from University of Barcelona. She has also studied Chinese language in the University of Oslo and Taipei. So without further ado, Your Excellency, Sina, please, your turn.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wang, dear Henry, and dear friends and colleagues. First of all, I would like to say thank you so very much to CCG for organizing this event. And the topic today, the Nordic model, generally refers to similarities in economic management, the organization of working life, the focus on human rights, and universal welfare services in the Nordic countries. But I think that it is not a universal or a uniform model across the Nordic countries either. But we share great similarities. And I think that you will hear also today that my colleagues, the other ambassadors, will also focus on some different topics than what I will focus on, so you get a better view of kind of the overall picture. We have a long tradition of valuable exchanges with the Chinese and Nordic experts on our respective society models. In the late 1970s, the Norwegian Ministry of Energy and our state-owned energy company at that time called Statoil shared experiences with CNOOC on management of the petroleum sector. Later, we have had valuable exchanges on pension reform and gender equality. Green financing is a topic. Making relevant comparisons between China and the Nordic countries may not intuitively come across as relevant. The governance models are very different. The size of the populations are miles apart. Still, we share some of the same challenges. For example, aging population, how to tune our education systems for the future labor market, how to avoid increased inequality in our societies. So today I would like to touch upon three topics central to the Norwegian governance model. The first is taxation. The second is management of petroleum resources. And the third is state ownership. If you want to understand how a country works, you should study its tax system. This is certainly true in Norway, where taxation issues are among the most hotly debated issues. And I believe the same is true also in China. Recently, I had a look at a very interesting book called Governing and Ruling: The Political Logic of Taxation in China. The author points to important dilemmas that China is facing around taxation and economic growth, taxation and representation, as well as relationships between central versus regional and local authorities. For Norway's sake, our tax system is indispensable for securing strong governance finances that fuel a sustainable welfare state. Openness and transparency in the tax systems are essential values. Although Norway has been blessed with abundant petroleum and natural resources, we say that our workforce is seen as the country's most important resource. The main goal of the Norwegian employment policy is to ensure that as many people as possible participate in the labor market and contribute to society. This is a prerequisite for the sustainability of Norway's welfare schemes. We must create value before we can share value. A broad tax base founded on a high level of participation in the labor force are necessary to ensure sufficient revenue. But we also believe it promotes fair distribution, value creation, and work incentives. Tax revenues are also used to redistribute and to reduce inequality between people socially, economically, and geographically. The Norwegian system and culture expect that all who are capable of participating in the labor market do so, and seek, through providing free training and education, to facilitate everyone's inclusions in the workforce. Norway has thus a relatively high retirement age, normally 67 years for both men and women, but you can also continue to work until you are 70 or even 72 in certain sectors. Norwegian policymakers are working for an inclusive labor market that makes it possible for men and women, immigrants, the young, the elderly, and people with disabilities to find gainful employment and continue working longer. Our high labor market participation, together with a broad tax base, generates income to the state, which in turn can be redistributed for the common good of society. Again, we must create value before we can share value. Making sure that those with the highest incomes and most wealth contribute most help generate sufficient revenue and fair tax burden. But it also fosters trust. Trust in our society is incredibly important. Income, wealth, and opportunities are often unevenly distributed geographically. To even out these disparities, successive Norwegian governments have developed policies that promote geographical redistribution. Subsidies are offered to various industries located in the periphery, such as agriculture, where natural food security is an important aim. In general, today's public welfare schemes in Norway include free healthcare beyond a small deductible and education, generous maternity and paternity leave, retirement and disability pensions, unemployment benefits, 100% sick pay, and other welfare services and benefits. In addition to ensuring a strong social safety net, the interaction between the welfare system, and a well-functioning labor market with small wage gaps has contributed to a high employment range, low income inequality, and a high degree of transparency, equal opportunities, and social trust. Another important factor for a good and stable Norwegian economy has been responsible management of petroleum revenues. When oil and gas were discovered on the Norwegian continental shelf in 1969, it sparked discussions about how revenue should be handled in order to benefit all Norwegians, including future generations. In 1990, Norway established a sovereign wealth fund, today known as the Government Pension Fund Global. The state's revenues from oil and gas extractions are now kept in the fund, together with the returns of the fund's investments. The fund's statutes and investment rules are regulated by the parliament, and the organization of the fund is supervised by the Ministry of Finance. But the fund operates independently and free from political interference. The majority of investments are made in low-risk international equities and bonds. The current size of the fund is around 1.4 trillion US dollars, which makes it the second largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. To avoid the so-called resource curse, we have established a budgetary rule, which says that transfers from the fund to the central government budget shall, over time, follow the expected rate of return on the fund. This is today estimated to about 3%. As significant emphasis is placed on evening out economic fluctuations and contributing to sound capacity utilization and low unemployment, the annual transfers may exceed 3% in difficult times and be well below in normal times. The transfers are thus used in a counter-cyclical manner into the Norwegian economy. The fiscal policy framework has aimed to preserve the real value of the fund for the benefit of the future generations. The revenues that we get today are not for the generations living today only, it is also for all future Norwegians. State ownership has also been an important tool for making sure that our common resources benefit all. Private ownership is, as a rule, preferred in Norway's mixed market economy, and direct state ownership requires a special justification. In the area of common resources, the state owns a higher share in the domains of energy and the extraction of natural resources. But private companies also participate in this sector and contribute to a competitive business environment. It is, however, worth underlining that state-owned companies in Norway operate at an arm's length distance from the government and are subject to the same rules and objectives as privately owned companies. The state can exercise its rights as a shareholder, but the company is managed and operated independently by its management personnel and board of directors. Typically, the government focuses on the rate of return for the many state-owned companies listed on the stock exchange and include private shareholders as well. So, dear friends, creating a perfect system for economic and social governance is nearly impossible, as most variations on any system have their advantages and disadvantages. Nevertheless, economic systems need to be well adapted to the changing situation in the countries that have adopted them, and a fair balance between must be found. Although the Norwegian and Chinese systems and realities differ, we find it to be highly valuable to engage in discussions and experience sharing with Chinese counterparts on such issues. So again, thank you very much to CCG and to all my Nordic colleagues who are also here today, and to the distinguished participants. So I look forward to further changes on these topics. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Your Excellency, Sine, Bertset. Very good speech. Actually, it was quite quite informative and stimulating, and also beneficial. I mean, you talk about tax experience, which I think now it's also a big way of how to have a create value before share value. I think that is really where we can also benefit from, and also fair distribution and good safety net, and of course high employment, no the risk and employment, and responsible government for your energy resources, and also state ownership, mixed market. So all those are really great point that are beneficial for all of us. So I really appreciate your sharing all those great ideas, and I think it will be a lot of stimulating for us. So again, I want to thank you and appreciate your great contribution. So now I would like to, certainly we'll have more discussion, but I'd like to turn our next speaker. We have Ambassador, Her Excellency Helena Segerland. And Ambassador Helena is a Swedish diplomat, and of course is a current Swedish ambassador to China. She has previously been ambassador in Tehran and Kuala Lumpur, and head of Foreign Ministry's Asia and Oceania unit, and served as the embassy in Hanoi, Helsinki, and Rome. And also from the yesterday event, I'm happy to know that Ambassador Helena will be the ambassador to Paris for the UNESCO, OECD, and many international organizations in France. So very good that we got her before her departure. I'm very pleased for you, Ambassador Helena, to share your experience. And you have a microphone there. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me for this event today. And the topic of my intervention today is addressing the demographic challenge in Sweden from an economic perspective. When we talk about demographic challenges, overpopulation is still a major one. And human population has grown beyond Earth's sustainable means. We are consuming more resources than our planet can regenerate, with devastating consequences. And this goes particularly for richer countries like my own. More people means an increased demand for food, water, housing, energy, healthcare, transportation, and more. And all that consumption contributes to ecological degradation, increased conflicts, and a higher risk of large-scale disasters like pandemics. This is a very important topic and one of its own. It's how to grow the world's population sustainably. But the demographic challenge that I wish to talk about today is from an economic perspective, because many countries are grappling with lower birth rates and aging populations, which increases costs to the economy, increased pressure on health services, increased competition for jobs, or decreased participation in the workforce, potentially less funding for young people, and an increased dependency ratio. I have some slides for you, but I'm not sure how to work this. Oh, it's okay. Yeah, thank you. I think I can maybe manage this. It's not moving. Oh, there we go. We have the next one. And I'll come to it. And of course, population growth will also, as my colleague Signe has said, it will lead to higher tax revenues, which can be spent on public goods such as healthcare and environmental projects. By that token, it can be considered a good thing to have an increasing population. Sweden is, just like our Nordic neighbors, one of the richest countries in the world. But we're also a rich country which population still grows and ages. And as this picture illustrates, by year 2100, Sweden's population is estimated to grow from today's 10.5 million to 13.7 million. And in a Chinese perspective, that's quite laughable. It's a four-tier city in China, if even that, but still a growth. And this is according to Eurostat, this picture, and Sweden is one of the few countries which will continue to grow, whereas others will decrease. And population growth in Sweden basically comes down to two factors. There are more births than deaths, and more people move to Sweden than move out. The policy challenge is to sustain a comparably high degree of labor market participation in order to support both our children and our elderly. So, what are the measures that Sweden has taken? In the 70s, which indeed it was a decade of many reforms, we came to a political consensus that we need to create possibilities for women to both work and have family. The economy was growing fast, and we needed all hands on deck in our manufacturing sector, in our service industry. But we also needed the population to keep on growing. So what was introduced in the 1970s was a number of reforms where we provide free and heavily subsidized childcare, equal for all. Municipalities have to provide for all children, regardless of what hours their parents work. So nighttime childcare for those who work, for instance, as nurses and doctors or others who work night shifts is also provided. School is free and equal and provides equal opportunities to all. There's also the provision of after school care so that parents can work full time. Parental leave has gradually been increased to what we have today. And it is, a child can have one parent on paid leave for almost 1.5 years, and with 80 to 90% parental leave pay. And this parental leave must be shared. So at least one parent needs to take out 3 months of the 1.5 years. And you see on this graph, famous, well-known profile in Sweden. He's a wrestler with his baby. And you see here that father's share of all parental leave days has increased tremendously. For instance, when I get new staff to my embassy, young men in their 30s, 35, and if they are married, I can be assured that they will ask for 6 months of leave, although they are posted abroad, and they are entitled to it. But that's just to be taken into account, just as we account for mothers to take their parental leave for at least 6 months. Universal child allowances are also provided, which increases with the number of children that we have. Maternal and under 5 mortality rates are low. And we have laws in place to hinder employer discrimination against pregnant women or to-be parents. We don't discriminate against men or against women. Although this is the case, women still take more parental leave than men, but the difference is shrinking. And as I said, many fathers today take at least 6 months off to take care of their child with pay. What these reforms did, apart from allowing women and men to work and have children, was that they transferred a lot of work from the informal to the formal sector. So household chores like cleaning, washing, ironing have become jobs, which has a lot of spin-off effects like increased taxation revenue. As a side bonus, people who don't need to save up, people don't need to save up for daycare, school, universities, and elderly care, and have thus more money and incentive to spend on consumption, in turn driving economic growth. Labor participation of women is today 71%. It's still lower than that of men, which is at 76%. But in an international perspective, that's pretty high. Not to say that we don't have a lot of challenges. Women still work more part-time than men. They have lower salaries and a higher unemployment. But we've come far during the past 50 years. Another factor affecting the labor force is, of course, how long we work. We are fortunate enough to have people living longer and healthier lives. Life expectancy has increased by almost 10 years for men and 7 years for women over the past 50 years, to 81 and 85 years respectively. But that also means that older people need to be supported financially for a longer time, unless they work longer, which is exactly what they're doing in Sweden. The earliest you can retire today and receive public pension is 63 years of age. And you have the right to choose to work until 69. If both you and your employer wants, you can also continue longer than that. Retirement age is constantly raised in pace with life expectancy, and you have economic incentives for working as long as possible. The longer you work, the higher your pension will be. And there is general political agreement that this is a good system, even though one challenge is to improve working conditions for those who carry out physically demanding occupational activities. For example, women who work as nurses with long hours and heavy lifting of patients, or others can have bodies and others. And we want to ensure that they have bodies and minds in shape to enjoy retirement after 45 years of working. And then, of course, we have immigration. And can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Because despite all our advances, the fertility rate in Sweden is now 1.6%, or 1.6 per woman, and higher than that in most other developed countries, but still not high enough to tip the scale in favor of a population growth in the long run, even though more babies are right now born than people die. In the 60s and 70s, during our manufacturing boom, we would never have been able to make it without immigrants from our Finnish neighbors and from Southern Europe. Today, we have newly arrived refugees from war zones such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Eritrea, and Ukraine, who are working in our services sector, taking care of our elderly and our children. Others are highly skilled immigrants advancing our technological and scientific development. Although there's no lack of challenges, they largely contribute to how we have overcome the demographic challenge that so many countries meet at a certain level of economic development. About 20% of Sweden's population is born abroad, and this is basically counting in 2 generations. So I, for instance, is part of that immigrant population, the 20% of the Swedish population, because my parents are born abroad. They are born in Finland and came to Sweden to find work in the 50s and 60s, as was shown in one of the earlier slides. So, in short, there is not one simple solution to address the demographic challenge, but there are many measures that can be taken that combined can come a long way. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador Helena Sutherland. That's excellent point. I mean, China is having this population. Also, last year we had a net growth of 400,000, first time in history. So it's a challenge. Now the government has already opened the child policy, but young people don't like to have kids anymore. So your experience, I think, is also very relevant. You know, about parent leaving pay, up to 6 months. I was quite surprised to hear that. That's a very good universal child allowance, and also immigration. 23% of the people in Sweden was not born in Sweden. That's a huge chunk, and so that shows how you tackle this aging issue, and that certainly has something for us to learn and to stimulate our thinking as well. So again, this is another very interesting perspective. Thank you, Ambassador Hina, very much. Now I'd like to hear another country from Nordic countries, which I have been visited before. I mean, we know Topsøe from Denmark has been very active in China. So I would like to invite His Excellency Thomas Ostrap Muller, Ambassador of Denmark to China. And he was Ambassador to China, but also to Mongolia. And I know he has served in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a long time, and was Ambassador to Poland and Undersecretary of the Resources Operation for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Of course, he has also been posted before very internationally in Berlin and also Cairo, and of course NATO. Many international postings. So without further ado, we have Thomas, Ambassador Thomas, to share your Denmark experience.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much to CCG for convening this roundtable discussion. I think it's very interesting. I think there's a lot to learn mutually. So I hope we have a good discussion afterwards as well. But the first thing that came into my mind when I heard about today's topic was the concept of trust. And of course, trust is not inherently a Nordic idea, or it's not indeed a foreign concept in China. But nor is trust with a single meaning. We can actually talk about different types of trust. One type is what we could call individual trust. That is a trust in someone you already know. And maybe the evolutionary trait is most likely dates back to sort of the primitive hunter-gatherer societies. If you were injured during a mammoth hunt, you could trust your small clan to take care of you. And that makes actually quite a lot of sense, because we all have family members that we trust dearly. So those who are very close to you, you trust. Another type of trust is what I would call institutional trust. That is your confidence in public bodies as courts, police, and administration. I will get back to that in a bit. But let me start by telling you about our take on trust in the Nordic countries. There may be variations, but I try to portray it as a Nordic feature. We trust each other almost by default. And this is a third kind. This is the societal trust. This is trust in strangers you have never met before. And I believe that this is quite fundamental to the Nordic model, or you could say the Nordic way of life. So let me give you an example. Many Danes, they will remember a story from 1997, when a Danish woman left her 14 months old daughter asleep in a baby carriage outside a coffee shop in New York. The mother was sitting inside and could see the baby through the window. So everything to her was in perfect. But soon, concerned citizen called the police, who took the baby into custody and arrested the woman. Luckily, she got off with a warning, and mother and child was soon reunited. Yet, if you have ever been to Denmark, you have without doubt noticed that many baby carriages outside sort of the local coffee shops. In Denmark, we routinely leave sleeping babies outside without any direct supervision, other than a sound recorder, so we can hear when they wake up. So this is a very concrete example of society. We simply trust others, people we have never met, enough to leave our children sleeping alone. And this leads me to institutional trust, because we also have great trust in our government, legal system, police administration. But again, don't get me wrong. One of our favorite pastimes is complaining about politicians or the bureaucracy. But in the end, we generally trust them to do the right things. And we trust that our public institutions and authorities act in a fair and impartial manner. Both societal trust and institutional trust is crucial to our welfare model. Denmark and the other Nordic countries are strong welfare states. The model relies on redistribution of tax revenues, as my Norwegian colleague touched upon, between strangers and not among people with mutual individual trust relations. Such a system doesn't work if you don't trust institutions to divide the cake fairly. And if it doesn't work, if you don't trust your neighbor enough to expect her to do her share, meaning pay taxes. In other words, this model means that everyone is expected to contribute, to have a sense of duty. But it also means that everyone is sure to receive care and help if anything happens to you. If you get sick or when you get old, you don't have to worry about sick bills or whether your kids live close enough. You can trust the system to take care of them. An added benefit of trust is that, from an economic point of view, is that it actually lowers transaction costs in the economy. With trust, it's easier to get things done. You don't need to provide excessive legal hedging to foster joint action or to promote exchanges between economic agents. And some would argue that it is a significant part of the explanation of why Nordic welfare states are also fairly wealthy states. But why do we have this high level of trust in the Nordic countries? It is not because we are inherently different from everyone else. I believe one reason is our political system. Through transparency, oversight, and separation of powers, people trust that policy outcomes and the public administration is run in a fair way. Laws and rules are clearly defined and fairly and impartially implemented, no matter who you are or how much money you have in your bank account. Another reason is the process by which we make laws. For instance, we have a very strong consultation mechanism for hearing public demands. This leads to a sense that rules are to promote and protect the interests of every individual. We have a sense that following the rules is both in your own interest as well as in the overall interest of society and the nation. This doesn't mean that we don't, from time to time, experience irregularities among public authorities or politicians. But when cases like this happens, we deal with them through due process in a transparent manner. And the almost certain debate about the issue will contribute to a sense that such problems are not allowed to take root. So, from the outside, our political system or debates in the public sphere about politics may seem disorderly or even chaotic. And maybe you get the sense that our society is brimming with discontent, antagonism. But to us, debate, sometimes fierce debate, is seen as a strength and a sign of a well-functioning healthy system. As such, debate, diverse opinions don't undermine the system. Rather, it actually contributes to trust in the system and between all of us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Your Excellency Thomas. And very unique, interesting perspective again on the talk about the trust and where we see Nordic countries, which is also share that very common, and you have give a very good story about this baby in the cradle that really safe and sound. So this this sense of duty and high degree of trust, I think is really for rapidly developed market economy like China and many countries, probably it's an area that we can also benefit from your experience, of course, strengthen the law and rules, and of course transparency, and all those are good points. And so I think we have a lot of China has a lot of uniqueness as well. We have a tradition of seniority, respect seniors, and family values, and education. But I think also that trust could be also a good area to be strengthened as well. That's very useful dimension, and I appreciate your point as well. Now I'd like to have another presenter, which is Ambassador Thorold Ibsen. You are from Iceland, which is also a country I happen to be there also, and I know Ambassador Ibsen is of course again from Minister of Foreign Affairs, but he has a lead negotiator for the relation with UK, with Iceland, representative on the European Economic Area, and also many organizations and committees that you've been also taking lead, and fishery negotiator and Iceland ambassador to Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia. So many good experience. So Ambassador Ibsen, your turn, please.
Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you for the initiative of inviting us to speak here today and be with you today and share our views with you. And it's a good initiative. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I wanted to devote my intervention to two observations. One is what I would like to call the Nordic analytical approach, and the second is our experience with sustainability, or what we have learned from trying to build a sustainable society, and to draw some lessons learned from our experience. I think it's important to bring out the analytical side of the Nordic thinking, because we are analyzing the world order here today, and we are trying to address how to address issues that we are all commonly dealing with. Now, the Nordics, as you have noticed, are very pragmatic. We avoid using strong words in our analysis of state of affairs, because we think to dramatize and use dramatized language is not helpful, and in fact can be dangerous, and it can encourage reactions and solutions that are neither useful or peaceful. Thus, instead of drawing up a dramatic picture of the challenges of the world community is facing today, we approach the challenges with a pragmatic and analytical mind, with a view of solving the problems. As a Nordic, I thus take issue with such broad stroke generalizations that we are living in an area of a crisis. We are certainly facing important challenges and changes, but we are not facing crisis. And certainly not a multitude of crises. Our institutions, society, and economy have not become dysfunctional. And neither our societies nor the world order are at the brink of collapsing or being transformed into a new social order or world order. On the contrary, we, at least in the Nordic countries and in Europe, we have efficient democratic governance that constantly addresses income disparity and other socioeconomic challenges through fiscal policy, the education system, healthcare, and the welfare system. We also like diversity in Europe, and we have a long-standing democratic tradition, institutions, and independent media that foster cohesion to free and transparent political discussion. Furthermore, we have decades of experience of resolving environmental problems, and we lead international cooperation to protect the environment and promote sustainable development. And finally, our security architecture, especially in NATO, has proven to be one of the most cohesive, capable, and committed collective defense alliance in the world. It safeguards our way of life, our freedom, and our security. This has been particularly very important since the Russian brutal and illegal invasion of Ukraine. This said about the analytic approach of the Nordics, I want to turn to Iceland and our experience of sustainability and try to draw a few lessons from our practices. Now, like our Nordic relatives and brothers and sisters, Iceland is an affluent, dynamic, and democratic island country. We enjoy one of the highest living standards in the world, and as a Nordic country, Iceland has an egalitarian society characterized by social inclusion, economic fairness, and gender equality. We built our affluence by adopting an open, export-oriented market economy and by developing the use of our natural resources into successful, competitive export industries. Relying as we do on our natural resources, we have learned the importance of protecting our environment and using our natural resources sustainably. With sustainable resource management, we secure more stable economy and long-term economic growth, as well as more equal distribution of economic rewards and social benefits. Moreover, by focusing on sustainability, the unleashed innovation and growth of green practices and low-carbon technologies that have brought Icelandic companies to the global market and indeed to China. And in this area, we have had a very successful and good cooperation with China. I will not cover that today. I've already addressed that in an article that is going to be published by CCG in the fall, and where I cover the green cooperation of Iceland and China. However, the transformation, or to transform the economy to sustainability, is often easier said than done. In our experience, we have learned a few things. For sustainable policy to be successful, it must have a broad support among businesses and citizens alike. It must be justifiable and based on reason. And the policy and its implementation must be clear and transparent. In other words, both businesses and citizens must understand the need for the policy, see their interest in implementing the policy, and be able to trust that its application is equitable, inclusive, and just. A few conditions for successful sustainability from our experience is that the policy must bring win-win for businesses and people as well as for the environment. The regulatory framework must therefore encourage sustainable business practices, including through economic rewards. And the social and economic needs of communities must be met with secure employment. Businesses and people must have ownership of the policy. That is, the policy and the measures must be developed with direct involvement of representatives of the relevant interest groups and stakeholders. And the policy must be subject to public consultations. Furthermore, the policy must be justifiable on the basis of reason. Thus, the environmental measures and decisions related to the management of natural resources must be based on best available scientific knowledge. Lastly, but not the least, the policy and its implementation must be clear and transparent. Citizens and businesses must be able to see and verify that the sustainable policy is working and applied in a just and equitable manner. Number of tools secures such transparency that we could mentioned a few, including publicly available environmental data, peer-reviewed environmental performance reviews of government policies, corporate environmental disclosure, reliable labeling for consumers, including eco-labels, and environmental impact assessments of projects. To conclude with a few keywords that we can discuss further during our roundtable after this presentation. In our experience, sustainability requires independent and peer-reviewed science. It has to be economically efficient and beneficial. It has to be socially equitable and just. It must involve ownership and direct participation of all stakeholders, citizens, businesses, and interest groups. And it must be transparent to ensure trust. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Ibsen. Very interesting point again. Also, that you emphasized the Nordic and analytical approach, which is really, I think, Iceland is a good example of how you get the business, citizens, and environment coexist in, peacefully, harmony, and that's really a great case study. I think we can also learn a lot from, and also you mentioned about peer review on many things. That's also interesting. I think that really to stimulate the professionals to participate in this analytical approach, which make all the policy more sound and more applicable. So thank you again for your sharing as well. Now we have a final ambassador from Nordic countries. Her Excellency Lina Karsia Mikola, good friend, ambassador from Finland to China, and of course she's appointed by the president of Finland to the ambassador to China, but also before that, you worked in the director as the Middle East and Africa in the Department of Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also you also posted many positions in Brussels and Kampala, Athens, and Budapest. So also a veteran diplomat from Finland. So we'd like to hear from you, Ambassador Mikola, please.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Henry, for inviting us. And it's very good to be here today with my Nordic colleagues, my Nordic friends, with whom, surprise, surprise, we share a huge amount of trust among ourselves. I will talk shortly about Finnish education system, and in particular of educational equality. And I think that I will concentrate on the Finnish system, but we already know after listening to my colleagues that the issue of equality is very important for all of us in every country's educational system also. So during the last years, my country has often been in headlines when it comes to quality education. According to many international surveys and studies, we have indeed done quite well in improving equal and quality education for all. But before highlighting the aspects of educational equality, let me start with a couple of words about history, background, and Finnish education system in general. In the end, I will also address the issue of vocational education, which I think is essential when building a society for all, society for equal opportunities. It is perhaps of interest for you to know that Finland was among the last countries in Europe to make education compulsory. We became independent from centuries of Swedish and then Russian rule in 1917. And the Act concerning general compulsory education came into force 1921. Schooling was common even before that, especially in the urban areas. However, in the countryside, where majority of Finns those days lived, schooling of children was less common. And this also relates to my own family background. My grandmother was born in a village in 1906. She never went to school. Anyhow, the Act from 1921 aimed to do away with the educational inequality between towns and countryside. And the idea of educational equality has remained one of the guiding principles in our education system ever since. Talking about equality, it consists of two dimensions, fairness and inclusion. Fairness means reducing the socioeconomic barriers, while inclusion is to ensure basic standards of education to all. We don't live in a perfect world, and it would be hypocritical to claim that we or somebody else has achieved a complete equality through education. But while not perfect, I would say that Finland and other Nordic countries have done quite well. Finnish youth have universal and free access to education. Not students' gender or school's language of instructions explains very small part of the difference in skills during his or her educational path. Whether the student comes from the capital area or from the sparsely populated northern part of the country doesn't make a real difference when evaluating skills or academic achievements. The successes that we have had didn't happen overnight 102 years ago. It has taken many decades to achieve. There's been series of reforms and responses also to changing economic needs. But through trial and error, Finland has built its successes in education. Of course, broader societal factors have also been helpful. The overall commitment to equality that we have already mentioned, various welfare services, and the question of trust, the strong culture of trust. That has also always been fundamental when developing our road. So there's a kind of whole society approach, and what works for us might not be always 100% copy-pasted for others. However, there are some ideas free for copying. So let me briefly mention some. Firstly, the education for all approach has been a hallmark for Finnish education policy since its onset. There's been, and there still is, a broad political consensus to build a public school system that will serve every student without costs. As a result, every Finn has a subjective right to participate in quality schooling cost-free, from early childhood education all the way to obtaining a university diploma. The equality aspect is supported by investments, for example, in free school meals, free school rides, but also in investing in special education. The Finnish education system is in many ways, very flexible. We know that students and pupils' preferences changed as they grow older. Education also needs to be able to respond to the fast-paced changes taking place in the labor market and the society. To allow for the necessary flexibility, there are no dead ends in our education system. The student entering and graduating a vocational school, for example, is still able to pursue later on university-level education. In recent years, efforts have been made to increase possibilities of personalizing studies, also already at the secondary education level, something that has been very much the case at the tertiary education. Coming back to the culture of trust. At the primary and secondary level, there are no ranking lists compiled at Finnish schools. The most important thing there is the system of trust based on the qualified and committed educational staff. Educational policy development is to a large degree headed by professional educationalists rather than politicians. Teaching is a sought-after career that people respect. Entry into that profession is quite hard. Often only 1 out of 10 applicants is accepted into teachers' training programs in the universities. But high standard of staff means also greater independence. The schools are able to supplement the national curriculum with locally important topics and independently decide how the teaching is carried out. And still a couple of words about vocational education and why. Because we think good quality vocational education is not only about equality in education, but also about equal opportunities in a society as a whole. The development of Finland's vocational education system has parts in our history. After the Second World War, Finland had to pay huge reparations to Soviet Union. The reparations were basically paid in goods, machinery, and ships, which we didn't have. In order to have all those goods, machinery, and ships, we needed significantly adjust our industrial production, which meant that we also meant significant amount of skilled and qualified workers. And that was the stepping stone for our vocational education school and appreciation of them. Nowadays, it takes about 3 years to get a vocational degree. The training is to provide the necessary skills for working life. But not only that, the education also supports students' growth as individuals and responsible members of the society. It is characteristics to Finnish system that about half of the students choose vocational education as their secondary education. So to conclude, we Finns, as other Nordics we have heard, we're usually quite pragmatic and level-headed people. We're equally level-headed and realistic about the challenges and problems facing our education system. The picture is not always rosy, and one must admit that during the recent years, there have been regional differences in educational inequality have grown. Also, the skills between students and schools have grown somewhat. However, from an international perspective, the differences between schools and students are still quite moderate in Finland. But when seeing inequality, we take it very seriously. The equality in education mirrors very much the equality in the society as a whole, and also the social cohesion that we, for the 6th time now, the happiest country in the world, so much value. And one more thing on a personal note, which perhaps explain a bit the thinking of education in Finland. During one of my previous postings, an educational expert from that country asked my older son, who was 15 that time, so what's the difference between the international school that he attended that time and the Finnish school that he, before the international school, attended? So my 15-year-old son explained that in this international school, we prepare for academic excellence, but in my Finnish school, we prepared for life. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Lina. Yeah, that's great. I mean, prepare for life. That's something we all need to cherish on that. So you have really talked about the educational experience in Finland, and we know that there's many international school in China that has Finnish curricula there. So this is really a good way to introduce your system, including your universal for all approach for all the Finnish student, and of course all those experiences are very valuable. So we had 5 Nordic countries ambassadors giving us 1 hour, actually more than this, over 1 hour introduction of their system, and we talked about the trust system, we talked about tax system, responsible management of and state ownership, mixed market, and also population growth, which is a very big agenda for China, and trust, social trust, societal trust, institutional trust, and of course we have also the analytical approach that we talked about, peer review, for example, and of course education. So all those elements had put together a whole picture of what has been doing well in Nordic countries. So I would like to, from think tank point of view, we'd like to study more, and we'd like to, summarize all the good points that the path that Nordic countries has taken. Now we'd like to invite our Chinese representative. We are very fortunate to have Ambassador Ma. She's the Executive Vice Chair, China National Committee for Pacific Economic Cooperation. Also very well-known organization. And also, of course, Ambassador Ma has been working in the diplomatic fields for a long time. She has worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for many years, and also posted in a number of countries and ambassadors, including Nordic countries, and of course, very knowledgeable and very experienced. So we are very honored that Ambassador Ma can personally attending, and I would like to have your perspective on China's experience as well. Thank you, Ambassador Ma.
Thank you, Chair, for your introduction. Good morning, everybody, and I would like to also thank the Nordic ambassadors for your introduction of the Nordic perceptions and practices for the common prosperity. Here, I would like to share with you my personal understanding of China's drive for common prosperity. So in the past 100 years and more, China has gone through an arduous and extraordinary transition from a poor country to a moderately prosperous one. Under the leadership of the CPC, China has found a path to modernization. In a short span of several decades, China has realized industrialization and has turned an impoverished and backward land into the world's second largest economy, top trader in goods, biggest holder of foreign exchange reserves, and biggest manufacturer. Chinese modernization is the modernization of common prosperity for all. Achieving common prosperity is a defining feature of socialism with Chinese characteristics. As an ancient Chinese scholar observed, governance is all about enriching the people. We have perceived that neither poverty nor polarization is socialism. Only common prosperity is socialism. The challenges we have been facing are a huge population, a weak economic foundation, and uneven development. Our per capita GDP ranked fairly low among countries in the world. The leadership of the CPC is the essential in our drive for common prosperity. Under the guidance of the CPC, we have adhered to the people first and people-centered philosophy and identified the principal contradiction facing China's society as that between unbalanced and inadequate development and the people's ever-growing needs for a better life. Closing this gap is the focus of all our initiatives. Since the reform and opening up, especially since the 18th Party Congress in 2013, poverty alleviation has been accelerated. By now, over 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty, and the middle income group enlarged to over 400 million people. We have won the critical battle against absolute poverty and finished building a moderately prosperous society in all respects. Nowadays, per capita GDP has risen to 81,000 yuan. Over 1 billion people are under the coverage of basic old age insurance, and basic medical insurance covers 95% of the population. Life expectancy has reached to 78.2 years. We have put in place the world's largest compulsory education system, social security system, and medical and health system. The sense of fulfillment, happiness, and security of people continue to grow. We are now intensifying our efforts to achieve common prosperity. The common prosperity we have in mind aims to better meet people's needs for a better life. It aims to achieve overall prosperity and prosperity for all. This will involve a long historical process, so many challenges still lie ahead. We will continue to promote a high quality development and high standard opening up, better leverage the role of both the market and the government, and ensure both performance and fairness to make the pie bigger and share it fairly. We will endeavor to maintain and promote social fairness and justice, bring prosperity to all, and prevent polarization. China's achievement in poverty alleviation is a significant contribution to the global poverty reduction. When 1.4 billion people, approximately 18% of the world population, is on course toward common prosperity and modernization, China will give a much stronger impetus for the global economy. As the biggest developing country, China always keeps in mind the greater good for the whole world. Common prosperity for the whole world requires the development of all countries. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, and the Global Development Initiative, GDI, both put forward by President Xi Jinping, are public goods that China offers to the international community. They are also open platforms for pursuing common development and prosperity. 10 years on, since the start of the BRI, over 3,000 cooperation projects have been launched, involving close to $1 trillion of investment and creating 420,000 jobs for participating countries. The GDI is also widely welcomed by the international community, with the support of over 100 countries and many international organizations, and with some 70 countries in the group of friends of the GDI. The initiative is giving a strong boost to the early attainment of the UN Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. We will stay committed to working with all countries to develop a community with a shared future for mankind. To conclude, I would like to say that China's example showcases that there are many different solutions to common prosperity and modernization. So any country can achieve it as long as the path suits its conditions and answers the need of its people for development. So countries should draw upon and share good practices and experiences of their way to common prosperity. So today is a very good opportunity for that reason. So thank you very much for the organizers and participants, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Ma, and for your excellent, overview, and also your unique perspective on the Chinese path, and also the Chinese way of approaching common prosperity. So this is really very impressive. I think in the last four decades, China built the world's largest education system, world's largest healthcare system, and the largest social security system, even though some still at the privileged stage. But that's exactly the point, that we need to learn from each other. And then that's why I think all the Nordic experience has been also very stimulating for while we build this such a largest system in the world, which is for 1.4 billion people, a remarkable growth that has we all have to contribute to the world prosperity, and it's very important that we share this experience together. A very senior expert going to participate in discussion. I'll pass this chair to Victor Gao, CCG Vice President, but also formerly worked with Minister of Foreign Affairs, and at one point in time, he was also interpreter for Deng Xiaoping, and so we'll have Victor to chair the following roundtable section.
Thank you, Henry. I would like to thank all the 5 Nordic ambassadors and Ambassador Ma, of course, once again for honoring CCG with your presence and with your very important discussions. Time is short, so let's go directly to the panel discussions. But since Henry mentioned Deng Xiaoping, I was thinking, how should the Nordic experience be described by Deng Xiaoping? Probably he would say it's socialism with Nordic characteristics. Or in another way, which could be equally eloquent, it is capitalism with Nordic experience. And I think from the Chinese perspective, many of us will be tempted to say, wow, this is socialism. Or at least the Nordic experience probably has higher level of or higher degree of socialism than the Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics. And now we are living in the new era headed by Xi Jinping. He called it socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era. And I think Ambassador Ma is absolutely right in setting the tone as to how China is promoting our own modernization, industrialization. However, I think we really can learn so much from the Nordic experience. I've been fortunate to have visited all the 5 Nordic countries. I've traveled as far away as to Tromsø and Kirkenes, all the way up in the Arctic. And I always wanted to go back. So let's go directly to the list of our very distinguished Chinese panelists. I would start with Mr. Zhao Hongtao, Deputy Director General of the Bureau of North America, Oceania, and Nordic experiences in the Nordic affairs in the International Department of the CPC Central Committee. And I'm also curious as to how they group North America, Oceania, and Nordic affairs together in one unit. But that's for another day, maybe. So, Mr. Zhao, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. That's really a challenge for us. First of all, I would like to thank CCG for holding this event, which surely will enhance the mutual learning between China and Nordic countries along the path in pursuit of common prosperity. Nordic countries are forerunner in pursuit, but in terms of a common prosperity, we know the Nordic countries have the lowest Gini coefficient among the at least OECD countries. And as the ambassadors have mentioned, that the Nordic countries established a universal welfare system and explore many innovative measures to improve the efficiency of public service sectors. I still recall vividly the education voucher system in Sweden. And recently I read a lot about the universal basic income experiment in Finland, which is very interesting, and we keep a close eye on that. And as to China, the 20th National Congress of CPC declares that CPC will advance Chinese modernization to realize the rejuvenation of Chinese nation. And one of the distinguishing features of Chinese modernization is common prosperity for all. And now the roadmap for advancing the common prosperity has already been drawn. And roughly speaking, we will march along several lines of operation. The first is that we will try our best to achieve high quality development. And as we have always said, just as happy life is achieved through hard work, and common prosperity can only be created with innovation and hard work. And just as your excellencies have mentioned that we need to create value first before we share them. Yeah, that's so that we must achieve high quality development. And the second, we need to put forward a more equitable or more evenly, more justified distribution system to narrow the gaps between individual incomes and consumption levels until they fall in appropriate range. And we will help the more low-income earners enter the middle-income bracket through creating more jobs. And the middle-income earners will reach around 800 million by 2035. That will create an olive-shaped superstructure. And another important line of operation is that we will ensure equitable access to basic public services. By basic public services, we refer to education, pension, medical care, such things. Just as President Wang have just mentioned, we have established the largest medical care system, education system around the world, but we will try to do more. And we will gradually increase basic pension benefits for rural and urban residents. And but I also want to mention one point is that we must keep in mind maintaining the sustainability of our economic development and financial resources while we are trying to improving our basic public services. We must not be overtly ambitious or get people's hopes up too much by making promises that we are not able to keep. Finally, though China and the Nordic countries are quite different in many ways, yet we believe we have much more in common. We all aspire to make people's life better. We all try our best to build a more cohesive society, and common prosperity is an important means to achieve all that. We believe China and the Nordic countries have a lot to learn from each other and to many opportunities to work together to move forward together along this course. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Zhao. I think the five ambassadors, as well as Mr. Zhao, mentioned one thing very important, that is to create wealth before you divide it up or allocate it. It reminds me of what Deng Xiaoping said, development is the hard truth. And don't argue about ideology, focus on development. Once you build up the pie, then you can divide it more equitably among the people. Now I give the floor to Mr. Zhang Lirong, who is the Secretary General of China Forum at Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University. I just told him I realized that one of his colleagues, Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, was at the Shangri-La Forum, and he was just by Secretary of Defense Austin and the Chinese Minister of Defense at that famous roundtable dinner. So, Mr. Zhang, you have the floor to ask questions or share your views. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this event. Your Excellencies, ambassadors, and dear colleagues, and thank you very much for the excellent presentations, which are still very enlightening, although I worked many years in Denmark as Chinese diplomat and visited all the Nordic countries several times. Due to time limit, I would like to limit to the welfare policy. We know that half a century ago, the Nordic countries gradually established the welfare system, which we call it from cradle to grave. So you have profound practice and rich experience in that. So studying them and learning from you, I think is of great significance for the improvement of the Chinese welfare system. As far as I have witnessed during the last decades, the content and Chinese welfare have been expanded. The welfare programs for the elderly, for the disabled and children have enjoyed continuous expansion, and the rural social welfare systems rapid development and social welfare management systems a continuous optimization. For example, the subsidy scheme for the elderly has been adopted nationwide with slightly different levels from region to region. My mother-in-law, who lived in Shenzhen, enjoyed a nearly 1,000 yuan subsidy and 12 hours free service every month. And healthcare, education, and welfare services have also been introduced in the countryside. So another achievement is the diversified social welfare supply pattern. It is gradually forming with the participants of government, civil societies, communities, corporate institutions, and individuals. But after all, I think the development process of China's social welfare is a catch-up model for the latecomer countries. So what China has in common with the Nordic countries are that we both realize that the welfare system or social security system will help ease class contradictions, promote social fairness and equality and social stability. Although the Nordic countries are capitalist systems, while China a socialist system with a basic principle to pursue a common prosperity. The biggest differences between them are the economic level and the proportion of population, especially the rural population. China's per capita GDP is only 1/4 to 1/5 of that of the Nordic countries. And China's social security expenditure is only about 14% of its total fiscal expenditure, so which is much lower than those of the developed countries. And on top of that, the proportion of rural population is as high as 35% in China, and still with many impoverished people. So I think China cannot copy the Nordic model, but we can learn from them. And we should develop the Chinese social welfare system based on our current situation. As far as I understand it, at present, China's social welfare policy can only be moderately inclusive. This inclusiveness is reflected in the expansion of China's social welfare from targeting vulnerable groups to the general public and expanding to the whole population. The moderation reflects that the development of social welfare in China cannot be separated from the level of the economic development. But I do expect the overall trend in the future of the social welfare in China will be to establish a social welfare system centered on a better life for its entire population. So if I sum up, I think China has made a great progress in social welfare, but there are still many shortcomings. For example, in legislation, in taxation, in encouraging fund channels, and in supervision of the NPOs and training of professional social workers. So I do cherish the presentations the ambassadors made on taxation, on intensives of people to work as long as you wish, on education equality, and especially on the very desirable maternity leave, 6 months for husbands and men. They are very ideal and desirable for Chinese. But I would at last ask you if you have any feasible suggestions for the current situation in China to step forward, to work forward with its current welfare schemes. So thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zhang. Should we wait until we have some more questions and the ambassadors would answer them all together? So allow me to give the floor to Mr. Li Xiaoyun, who is an expert in poverty reduction. And we know for sure that China uplifted more than 800 million people out of abject poverty and has eliminated abject poverty as a social phenomenon. This is truly remarkable. I think if there is any real achievement in modern history, this is the real achievement. And I think not only the Chinese people, but mankind should be really taking great pride in this unimaginable achievement. So, Mr. Li,
thank you.
To hear your views on this.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for the CCG to invite me here to join this very interesting discussion. I just like to offer my my analysis on the issue of. But actually, we have to link. The issue of common prosperity with poverty, because the reduce poverty and the eradicate absolute poverty. I put this in the two terms. Reduce poverty always exists, so we need to reduce, but we need absolutely completely eradicate absolute poverty. So eradicate absolute poverty is the first and the most critical element to persuade common prosperity in the future. So this is the process, and I like to use this opportunity to provide you the little bit insight how the absolute poverty in China has been eradicated. And if you look for that, is two lessons. That's two lessons for through this process. And number one, and I see it's just Victor said, we don't have to argue the remarkable achievement that China has achieved in this field. We don't have to argue and within China and outside China. So we have consensus for this. And the lesson I would see for the global development, we should see that the first and the link with China's growth model. And China's growth model linked with its nature of growth, not only in terms of economic measure, but also in terms of who benefits most from that process. And if you look at the whole process of China's growth, and then we have divided three stages. First, with the agricultural dream during the 1980s, and towards the middle of 1980s, end of 1970s to middle of 1980s. And during that time, and 85% of population lived in rural area. And 36 to 40% of GDP derived from accounting significantly for the whole economy. But today, only less 7%. And therefore, the first, and during that first stage of growth, and the farmers' income increased 17% over 6 years. The agriculture grew at 6 to 7% for 7 years. And it's the highest in China's history, highest. So this means the first initial stage of the growth already become proper. It's very important. Otherwise, growth always decoupled with the poverty. Secondly, followed agricultural productivity increase and immediately rural industry. Rural industry in China, we call township rural enterprises, 乡镇企业. Rural industry. And the farmers come out from agriculture engaging in the industry, but not in the urban area, not in the city, and follow the massive industrialization and urbanization. So moving people for 500 million people moving out of the rural areas. So as Victor said, today we have also, less 30% of the around 30% of the people living in the rural area, but actually actually engaging with the agriculture population, it's only less 20%, less 20. So great transformation within 40 years. And with 40 years great transformation, and the farmer, that benefited from the transformation process, they get income. So that is the first lesson now to see, and it is relevant to other developing countries. Very important, you're looking for the growth must be proper. And that is very different from the model. We look for the Nordic model, for the distributive model. So China, we're looking for common prosperity. We're looking for poverty reduction. We have to look for growth, as also Victor mentioned, and also others mentioned that we need big cake. And in 1978, our average GDP per capita in US dollar on 158. So if we take nominal price today, and China's GDP per capita increased 100 times in nominal price, not in real price, in nominal price. And in real price, it's also many, many times. So that is the very important foundation for us to persuade common prosperity. And the second lesson I like to see the inequality. 1978, Gini coefficient in China was only 0.2. It's a very equal position, but a very poor position. And when the economy started to grow, and the inequality increased. So inequality increased to the level of 0.47 during the first part of this century, means around 2010, 2011, very high. So inequality. Therefore, China had to deal with a double challenge. One is to still need to reduce poverty, absolute poverty, and eradicate absolute poverty at the same time to deal with inequality. It's very difficult. Very difficult. It's not very easy. So we cannot either rely on, as we did before, that economic growth. So trickle down mechanism is no longer there. And secondly, we cannot also use Nordic model to redistribute to everybody. We can't do it. Therefore, we had a combined approach called the developmental approach. Developmental means we're dealing with people at the same time for economic growth and support for the economic growth. At the same time, we look for relevant lessons we learned from Nordic social welfare state, the welfare system from Germany and from Europe. So I was during that process to learn a lot from the Nordic experiences, including pension system, everything we mentioned. I don't need to mention any longer. But here I like to say, for the redistributive model, tax and the transfer are but only part of the story, because only depending on the transfer, the tax and the transfer, still not enough. Why? Because to reach social services does not only mean money. So you give money, you subsidize student to in the school, but school need buildings, school need everything, school need infrastructure, need water, everything. Therefore, the improved social services is not just about budgeting through the treasury, the budgeting looking for the education, teaching quality, but it still is within the overarching issue of development. Means that you need a huge budget to support other areas like roads, school buildings, materials, teaching qualities, many, and also the nutrition, like the breakfast, the lunch, breakfast, nutrition, everything. Therefore, China adopted what I call the multi-party partnership. So look for what we did in equality and the Eastern and the Western development partnership, 东西协作. So in addition to the transfer, increasing transfer to the social protection system. So we have also the private partnership, the private business support poor areas, and we have also government institutions like universities, like my university. We have a responsibility for one county in Yunnan, and for many people who are not really familiar with this university, you are teaching, you are doing research, you can't do this work. So we have all this social responsibility to use our capacity financially. We need to contribute every year 3 million RMB to the county we actually put into the partnership officially, and we need to send our professors and students there to do the social services, everything. So you see the partnership program, comprehensive multi-partnership program plus this one, looking for the. So these two lessons, I just like to add to your presentations and your information, and to give a little bit in-depth information to understand how China dealing with the absolute poverty as well as dealing with inequality economically and socially. And I don't have to mention lastly to say that politically, and as Madam Ma said, and this is a work which look at the UK case, 100 years, you reach that, and look for the Norwegian case, and there, if I'm, correctly, and it's also more than 100 years, and we have dealt with this complicated and very complex problem, social, economic, political problem within 40 years. It is very difficult. This requires a very, very strong and accountable leadership and the government, political commitment and political institutions. So thank you very much for this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Li. I think we can really spend more time in such exchanges and discussions. However, time is running short, so allow me to give the floor to Francesco Sisi, who is from Italy and is now a senior research fellow at Renmin University of China. And I do hope between China and Italy, we will only debate which country really invested pasta or noodle, and there are no fundamental issues of debate between China and Italy. However, Italy versus the Nordic countries are very, very different as between Nordic countries and China. So, Francisco, I'm all ears. We are all ears.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Henry, for having me here and for intruding from the Southern Europe. But I have a Nordic connection. My son-in-law is from Norway. And and let me start with this very personal note. I know that my daughter, being a Chinese Italian, half Chinese, half Italian, now living in Norway. She had some troubles also with trust issues, you know. She couldn't believe she could leave her shopping outside the shop or the coffee shop, and let alone a child, and nobody would take it. And also my son-in-law has troubles coming to Italy and mistrusting the shopkeeper in giving him a fair price. And so the issue of social trust and institutional trust, I think, is a problem for, as I think is for China. But on the Chinese experience, as Italian, I can see that the past anti-corruption campaign actually tried to address also this problem. That is, the anti-corruption campaign helped to build some greater trust in Chinese society, and I think it managed to do well to some respect. And also on the tax issue, I would say this is also a very important, very basic problem for Italy, and I think for China as well. For China, many dynasties had fell because there was a breakdown of tax income, and definitely tax is very much related to trust. And but also, I would say the problem is that for Italy and for China, there is a high level of trust within groups, within groups of people. Chinese speak of guanxi, and Italy speaks of friendship, of camaraderies. And within this group of comrades, so to speak, in Italy, there is a very high level of trust. Now, what I would like to ask is, from your perspective, how could you transfer, how would it be possible to transfer this level of trust within certain groups to societal and institutional trust in society and states? And I think this is a very important subject for China. And also on the issue of trust, we now see that there is an international crisis of trust between China and some other countries, let's not mention with other countries. And I appreciated very much what Ambassador Ma was saying about the interest of China in building a greater prosperity, and I would say well-being, international well-being between China and the rest of the world. That is, China's development is not against the development of the world. It is in favor and helps the development of the world. However, something is not going right. From your perspective, what could be improved here and what could be better done? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francisco. You raised some very important questions before the five ambassadors and Ambassador Ma have the floor to answer these questions. Mabel Miao also will make some important remarks before we wrap up this part of the discussions.
Thank you, Victor. Now, important remark, just to say some words to echo our distinguished ambassadors and experts mentioned. This is so exciting occasion and topic as according to the 20th Congress CPC Party Congress report, the common prosperity is a topic in China. It's everywhere in China we're talking about that. This is, we would like to create the China's path to the common prosperity. But I would like to echo what Ambassador from Finland, you mentioned that the education, the occasional education for individual. I think the society is the teamwork of the individuals actually. So what kind of young people we would like to educate it? and what kind of young people, their attitude to their life is very, very important. You mentioned one sentence that the Finnish education is preparing for life, not just academic. That is quite impressive. I think in China, all the parents are struggling for the kids' education. Actually, it's also the topic for the whole society. We need the young people to create the common prosperity. So what's their attitude to the common prosperity? What is their attitude to the life? So we need to learn from each other, from the Nordic countries' experience on the path to your common prosperity. But I think the final common prosperity is for human being, the whole human being. So this is a very inspiring opinion, stimulating opinion to me as well. As the time is limited, I just want to echo that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabel. Mike, you also want to make some points? Yes, please, Mike.
Okay, thank you so
Mike,
much.
Vice President of CCG, yes.
Thank you, Victor. Maybe I start with what Deng Xiaoping was saying. If you look at China, 40 years open door policy, regardless whether it's black cat or white cat, whoever cat and mouse. I look at China phenomenon achievement in past 40 years goes, I believe, how we can create a welfare system for the society, 800 million population out of extreme poverty. Let's prove evidence to the world. One of the things I really enjoyed this morning is with our ambassadors you are sharing from Nordic countries. Those can further help China to build a further bridge towards to next stage. I look at my fellow panelists from China share the reality of what the things we can do. But if we come from where we are, we look at it's like what we're saying. All the river will go to ocean, right? Regardless where you originate. So we all here work together with the Nordic countries to build the better future for the world, better future for society. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand we need to wrap up at 12:05 because some of the ambassadors need to go to the airport. So I think we probably will leave some of the questions for another occasion to answer. Yeah. Or you want to answer the questions? We still have a couple of minutes more. Thank you, Lem. You have the mic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to make a couple of comments because we also had a question from Professor Zhang about if we had any things that we could share back to China. First of all, I would like to say that I think that this session has shown how much of a kind of common experiences we have, not least in the Nordic countries, because I could sign up to everything that my other Nordic ambassador friends have said today. One thing that when I travel around in China and meet especially young people, I try to answer, or I try to ask the same question wherever I go, just to have a bit of a feeling of what is important for young people. So I often ask them, now that there's a change in the child policy in China, would you like to have more children? And they say, well, ideally yes, but no, because it's expensive to have children. It's expensive to have an apartment. It's expensive to provide for education. So I think that this is an area. Of course, I know that the Chinese authorities are doing a lot of work and is focusing a lot on this issue. But it is an area where I think the Nordic countries can provide some inspiration, maybe. I don't think that any of our policies can be copied to China, but it is possible to be inspired by some of our policies. And also China is a country where you still do a lot of city planning. You still have urbanization going on, people moving from the rural areas and into the urban areas. And in that whole process, planning for kindergartens, planning for leave, planning for paternity and maternity leave is important aspects. And also, I think that in that whole process, you would also maybe have a look at the pension age. The fact that many women leave when they are 55, or men leave for pension when they are 60, are of course also combined or also influence ability to grow a family. I think that building more kindergartens, providing more childcare, providing paternity leave is important for the young families, but it is also important for people who are older in age, so they do not have to retire to stay at home to take care of their grandkids. So this is something that is joined together. But I would like to thank everyone for having this discussion with us today, and we have a lot that we could also continue on later on.
Yes,
Just,
Ambassador, please. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I would say this has been a truly interesting discussion, and the contributions have been many and very interesting. I would say some of the concept we've heard from our distinguished Chinese colleagues, it's like, I could sign up to all of the steps taken, but sometimes it's like, when you're playing with Lego, you have to know a way how to put them together. So on seeking inspiration from the Nordic countries, I would say one, I wouldn't call it advice, but sort of reflection is that when we talk about social security systems, it's important, like sort of mentally, not to see it as a running cost, but as an investment into people and to future prosperity. And when you do this, it's a way of incentivizing people. They're provided with security nets, and that would incentivize people to be more flexible, be more mobile, and also sort of in a greater sense also to provide a more the foundation for more smooth running of the economy, and then eventually innovation and then future prosperity. So my point is that investments in these kind of tools are quite good, and I would say most of the Nordic countries, they are the living proof that return on investments would be quite good in this field. And then to Mr. Sisi's question, how do you incorporate the strong trust values in groups among friends into the running of the state? I would say that you should, as a state, mirror the strong trust among friends. So as a state, you should be a very good friend to your population. So you should mirror these things, because the point of having trust in a group is that if you do not live up to this trust, you will be excluded from the group. So it must be very deep in the stomach of those who we have trusted power. If you do not live up to the trust of the population, it might go very wrong. So this kind of thinking.
Thank you, Ambassador. I understand the ambassador from Sweden also wants to have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to make two comments to answer Professor Zhang and also Mr. Siti. There was one question about, or not necessarily linked to a question, but I think it's maybe a mistake to think that you need to make the cake bigger before you can divide it. It's a question of how you divide the current cake that you have so that it's divided in a way which is fair and also provides opportunities for those who have low incomes, for instance, to consume more, which is also necessary for the Chinese economy. But also dividing the cake that you actually have now requires tough political decisions. And strong political leaders must not shy away from making these very painful decisions. And I'm thinking maybe of, in particular, a pension reform, which is necessary in many countries. And we have seen the protests in France, protesting the increasing of the pension age, but also tax reforms, which are necessary to increase the revenues of the state. With regards to how to transfer trust to institutions, I think it's also very important for institutions to be held accountable. So how do you do that? How do you increase their accountability so that whatever policy decisions are made, none of us are perfect. If you make a mistake in your policies, how can that be redressed? How can you be held accountable for that and change it if need be? So I think that's also an important issue to instill and have accountability of your political leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you are making a very important point, whether the pie is big or small, divided very equitably so that everyone is very happy. And also allow me to make one quick point. I think many people in China, they are very much puzzled when they see people in France refusing to work longer. They demonstrate. I think lots of people in China want to work longer. They do not want to retire that early. So that's another story. Ambassador from Iceland, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would also like to respond to the questions of Professor Chung and Cici. I think it's important the point that he made that you cannot copy the Nordic model. For one thing, we have to acknowledge that our systems are different. So there are basic differences between our systems that make it difficult to copy the whole thing over. But there evidently we can learn from one another. We can learn from and we can get inspiration from one another, specific policies, and that is in both directions. We should learn from from your system, and you should learn from ours. But I want to, if I were to answer your question, was a single recommendation to come with, I would come with the same one of my Norwegian colleague. I experienced the same thing going about speaking to young people, especially young women, concerned about the ability to have a family and have work life, children, and complexities that surprise you, and you're not quite used to where you come from. But there are 4 elements in my system, where I come from, in my country, that contribute to the ability of young people to establish a family, have children, and work. First, education. We start in the school system when the children are very young to teach both boys and girls to cook, to sew clothes, to do handiwork, and to take care of children. So you start with them very young to understand they both have a part of the responsibility, and they both should contribute to the running of the family. And at home, we are accustomed to having our children cook for us and take part in preparing the meal, do the dishes, whether they're boys or girls. Number 1. Number 2, the daycare covered by my Norwegian colleague is very important. Number 3, the parental relief was a revolution, both in terms of sensitizing men about their parental responsibility, that they have to also stop working when they have a child and share with their wives or the partner the upbringing of the child and bringing them into the education system. And last point there is also the care of the elderly. often young people, it seems to me here, have difficulties because they have to take care of their elderly parents. That takes lots of room. We have solved that with public support, where elderly people can stay at home on their own longer and receive public support. And my generation, we did not have to take care of our parents on a daily basis. They could take care of themselves with the support of social services and later, if they needed, to go to an institution. On the trust issue, I agree with many things that are said. Here, two things. Again, education is something that I always believe in. This is where the Finns on the right, you have to start at the beginning, you have to educate people, and you have to educate children about trust. Second, transparency. We all have to share the same information. The government cannot have one information and the citizen another and the business another. All have to share the same information, whatever area it was, taxation, resource management, education, what it is. And that information has to be open to scrutiny, peer review, and discussion. And otherwise, you cannot trust the one you're working with if you don't know what they're doing with what you're giving. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The ambassador from Finland. Thank you.
But just very quickly to wrap up from my part, we've heard here many times today the great achievement of China lifting 800 million people out of poverty during the last decades. But of course, the scale is very, very different. But I would maybe like to remind something about us Nordic countries. We have not been equally prosperous among ourselves always. Finland was always the poor cousin. And as Helena mentioned here earlier, in 1960s, but also in 1970s, hundreds of thousands of Finns emigrated to Sweden, Canada, or Australia to find a better life when we were not able to provide it to them. But one thing that really made a difference was the great reforms in education that then we decided to have in 1980s. That opened the way for all citizens to have an independent and successful life, to choose the educational path, academic, vocational, or whatever. And that made us to come on an equal path with our Nordic friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Allow me to represent CCG to thank all the 5 Nordic ambassadors and Ambassador Ma for your important speeches. And also allow me to wrap it up on a personal note. Ambassador from Iceland, your former Prime Minister, Mr. Herman Song, was a good personal friend of mine. We kept a correspondence with each other. And he wrote me a letter, a very lengthy letter about his experience of his meeting with Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s. When former Prime Minister Herman Song passed away, I went to Reykjavik and I paid respects to his grave. His grave was very small. It was a cremated ash burial. So it was very small, together with lots of other small plots. I was very moved. And I was told by the cemetery, I was one of the very few people from outside his inner family circles to go all the way to find out the graveyard for Prime Minister Herman Song. And his letter to me, recalling his meeting with Deng Xiaoping, was published in a Chinese magazine. I will forward you a copy about how he recalled his conversation with Deng Xiaoping and how Deng Xiaoping commented on Gorbachev and the difference between the Soviet experience and the Chinese experience, which I believe led to what China is versus what Russia is. And another point is that after listening carefully to all the 5 ambassadors from Nordic countries, if no one has proposed this, I want to propose that maybe we can focus on Nordicism, Nordicism, because otherwise it is difficult to put a label on what the Nordic countries are doing. There is so much important thing that the Nordic countries are experiencing with, which are very unique, very different from the Chinese perspective. It looks like a utopia. It looks like a dream. It's like a surreal, because what you have achieved for the satisfaction of your people seems to be so far away because China is faced with so many daunting challenges. And when I think about 1.4 billion people versus the total population of Nordic countries, or even the Chinese population is larger than the OECD countries combined, it is truly a very different challenge. And I hope you will also understand how difficult it is to run a big country like China and to make sure that our living standards keep moving up. And I hope the Nordic countries will also support us in our continued economic and political reform to such an extent that your utopia will be our reality, probably many centuries later down the road. And on that note, I hope you will agree with me that we want to give loud applauses to the 5 Nordic ambassadors and Ambassador Ma. Thank you.